So yeah, I'm Jake Birkett, and I'm from Graylian Games, and I formed my company in 2005. I used to make business software, but my sort of dream was always to make games, and I did that as a hobby for 20 plus years. And then I eventually set up my own company and started to make games, and I've been doing that for 14 years this summer. And I've made 11 games, working on my 12th one now, so that's kind of cool. And that means I've been sustainable to a certain extent, though there have been many ups and downs, and we can sort of delve into that, as well as my tactics for being sustainable in this talk. I do need to probably switch Twitch back on to make sure I can hear you guys if you have another question.
Okay, well we've pulled our mics down to let you talk, and then we'll come in as soon as we do have a question that we want to ask for you. So it'll be interview style, and I'll be running it while you talk. So it'll mainly be me and you, primarily right now.
Okay.
All right, cool. So first question for me is: you said this was a part-time hobby that has now become your full-time gig. Can you talk about that moment where you had to make the jump, where you knew, like, you know what? I'm going to do this full time. When did that come, and what were the circumstances at that period of time that you were faced with?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I was making business software full time, but I was making a game in my spare time, and I was staying up super late every night, coding to like 4 a.m. And I felt like a zombie, and I realized that I couldn't continue to make games like a zombie every night, and I wanted to just really do it full time. So I decided to make this switch over to full-time dev. The issue there being that you know, I sort of assumed I'd make loads of money and it would be great, but of course it took a long time to make money and it was a big struggle. But I wanted to do it anyway because it had been my dream for so many years. And I spoke to my wife about it, and she, you know, was supportive of that. And I did need to support myself via many different other sort of income streams at the beginning, whilst I sort of worked on my first few games.
All right. And what was the first game that you decided to go with once you, like, after you had made the jump, you're like, okay, now I'm doing this professionally. What was the first game that you put your time and efforts into to start developing?
Okay, sure. So I was actually making a game called Iron Fist at the time, which was a sort of platform game where you're a kung fu expert and you go around and just beat people up. And this was great fun, and I was having good fun making this game. But I realized at the time there wasn't a market for that because Steam didn't really exist then, and nor did, or it did, but it wasn't open to other indies. And there wasn't really a market for this game, believe it or not. So I switched over to making casual games because Big Fish Games and Real Arcade and all these other sites were big at the time, and you could make some kind of cool puzzle games on there and make money if you made the right sort of one. So that's kind of what I switched over and did. And my first one was a Christmas themed match 3 game, which if anyone's seen my GDC talk, I've mentioned that on there. But it wasn't a big success at all, unfortunately. It, you know, only made a couple of $1,000s over 12 years or something, so it wasn't a big success at all. But it had sold more than one unit, and I went on and sold, made more games and kept going from then on. Really, it was kind of encouraging that somebody bought my game at least.
Yeah, I know that feeling, having done like a couple of indie iPhone games myself. But a question that we do want to ask, especially since you have so much experience here, is roughly, because we have a lot of people on Twitch, YouTube, who are probably looking to get into this or hobbyists themselves. How long would you say you should spend, you know, kind of developing or making your indie games? Like, what do you have, like a cutoff point, or what's your strategy for kind of identifying like the proper scope?
Okay, sure. Good question. So when I first started making these games, they were very short, actually. Some of them only took me 3 months long, some of them sort of 6 months long. And the ones that were successful made a good amount of profit per hour. I mean, I track the time that I work on all of my games. So, you know, I log the hours, I look at the money that comes in and just do a simple sum to see how much I'm earning. But I did a survey on Twitter a while ago, and what I found out was many devs had been working on their game for more than a year, but some of them like more than 3 years. And I was like, I'm really dubious about how profitable a game that you spend 3+ years on can be. The longest game I've worked on was 2.5 years, and it was too long. It was too overscoped. There was too much in it, and it's made me quite a low amount per hour that I worked on it compared to games that I worked on a lot quicker. And I've got some sort of examples I can give if that's would be helpful.
Oh, of course. I mean, we'd love to hear. Do you have extra materials that you need to share, or can you just recite? Just let us know so we can prepare on our end.
Oh, yeah, it's okay. I've got notes on a side screen here, so
okay.
I prepared. So, for example, if you were to spend a year making a game, and it was you, and you hired, say, an artist or two and some sound people, whatever, and you spent maybe about $35,000 on contractors, okay, and your game, if it grossed $100,000 on Steam, you would lose $35,000 to Steam for their cut and for things like sales tax and refunds and so on. Then you'd have to take $35,000 off for the contractors, and that leaves you with only $30,000 for you, right?
Off of $100,000.
And if you spent a year on it and you divide up the average amount of 40 hours per week, you end up with $14 an hour for a year's worth of work. And okay, that's more than maybe working in that game. Your dollars per hour would be 7, which is definitely a problem. And if your game didn't make 100,000 and only made 10,000, like many indie games don't even make that much, then you've worked for $1.40 an hour. So this is the kind of mathematics which people need to be realistic about if they're full-time indie. It's different if you're a hobbyist or if you've got funding, and we can sort of go into that in a minute.
Okay, so I'm assuming you did this same kind of conversion on your first project, especially the one you said, it didn't end up being super profitable, but you did make it. You followed through and you were a professional on it. I guess you don't have to tell me the number, but what was your reaction to like seeing maybe the initial sales of your first product after being professional? Be like, okay, we did it. Here's our game. And then 3 months later, you check back in and you do the formula and you say, oh boy, my hourly rate. How did you feel? And can you take us through?
Well, it's funny because it was mixed, because I was genuinely happy that it had sold anything. Somebody bought my game. Great. It's something I can build upon. That was the positive aspect. But the dollars per hour over 12 years is something like $6 or $7 an hour. So it's terrible, right? 12 years of sales, but at the beginning it was like $1 an hour or something. It was not a viable business at all. So that was obviously very disappointing, because I was naive and I thought back in 2005, I can make video games and sell them on the internet and then make money and it would be awesome. And that just turned out not to be the reality. It took 18 months before my first game that actually made me any kind of decent money. So that was a lot of practice, learning the market, working with the distributors and a publisher and all that kind of stuff.
All right, so my next question, and this one, it's a little selfish, but like I'm always looking for those motivating moments where it's like, okay, this wasn't the ideal scenario after I've tried very hard to make something, but how do I collect myself? How do I reorganize and then say, but I'm a business, so here's the next product, here's the next effort, and we're going to do it again, but we're going to do it better, I guess. So transitioning away from the first product to the second game that you developed, I guess, can you take us through and give our audience advice on doing that?
Okay, sure. With the second product, to be honest, wasn't a lot better than the first one. It didn't sell very well either. That was actually because I had a mismatch with the audience. I hired a guy who made some pixel art for a match 3 game, but the audience didn't want pixel art. They wanted either nice painted art or 3D art. But a better transition would be the game after that. We hired some decent artists who made some really nice backgrounds, a decent UI, some nice looking shapes that were 3D rendered and span around. And we hired a musician who did really great classical music. We got some decent sound effects in. So the whole game was just a whole level of polish above the first few games. So I think that was my mistake with the first few games, is they were like 1990 shareware sort of level of quality, and it wasn't good enough for the market. But as soon as I upped the quality, suddenly people paid interest and started to buy the games, and then I just doubled down on that, really, keeping upping the quality, but within a certain cost bracket, because within that market, if you spent too much, you wouldn't make the money back, but if you spent a certain amount, you could do. And I think that's the same even on Steam. A lot of people, I see them spending money on sort of voice actors and going to shows and spending it on all sorts of things, hiring orchestras and stuff like this. And it's like, unless you're a big studio and you've got some guaranteed hit, which there's no such thing, you shouldn't be wasting your money on all this stuff. You do need enough to hit a certain quality bar, but you need to analyze, are you spending the money in the right areas, and are you going to get a return on that? That's if you're doing it from a business point of view. It's very different if you're a hobbyist, or you've got some grant or money and you can just do whatever, but it's very rare to be in that situation.
I do have a loaded question, though. We wrote down a question that we wanted to ask you specifically, the viceroy of all game data. We wanted to know, you're well known for sharing detailed data collected from your indies. Can you tell us about that and why you're so forthcoming with performance and metrics and things for the community?
Sure. Well, I've always shared stuff just because I find it interesting, and when you share stuff, you get other people chime in with their own data and thoughts, and it helps the analysis, really. I mean, not everyone likes to share their data, but I've always liked to be open about it. And one of the big things that I did last year was I worked out this kind of magic number, which is if you have a certain amount of wish lists before your game launches on Steam, and you multiply it by 0.5, or divide it by 2, that gives you the sales you are likely to make in your first week on Steam.
I like that.
Though that's not always certain. Some people get double and some people get half.
Sure. But it feels like a good
it's a good ratio, and a hell of a lot of people have used that since then to gauge the possible success of their game.
Yeah, so if I can make a title that gets me 2 million wish lists, that should be 1 million sales first week. I'm excited. No, but I totally understand the ratio, because it's hard to turn an intangible idea into some sort of an expectation. But you'd be foolish to at least not think about some sort of way of trying to at least gauge what you can anticipate coming in, So what have you found to be some of the best tools, I guess, in helping you sustain as an indie developer outside of game development software, right? Like, I don't know, sure, you might say something like a QuickBooks, but maybe there's like a third-party thing that you use that helps you on the day-to-day that other developers actually don't know about yet, that helps you specifically, like with asset management or with time management or scheduling. Okay,
sure. To be honest, I'm a bit of an Excel nerd, so I use Excel for my accounts. I do most of my accounts and then send them off at the end of the year to get them stamped by an official accountant. I use Excel for my game design documents and numbers and charts, and obviously track all my sales and stuff like that. So Excel is your friend, or a Google equivalent, I guess. Also, I use just Notepad a lot, or Notepad++, which is pretty awesome. Just mostly really to manage my sort of day-to-day tasks. I mean, I put everything in a sort of big spreadsheet for the project, but I like to sort of split out from that a smaller bunch of tasks that I'm working on now. I used to use a notepad and pen, but now I prefer using something digital because I can edit it and shuffle it around. So those are the sort of main two tools I use. And then I also use Dropbox. Now this will make a lot of people out there cringe, but instead of using source control, because it's just me, I just have my stuff on Dropbox, and I can roll back if I need to, and I also back it up regularly anyway, and that seems to work for me. I use Photoshop a lot, which isn't exactly a programming tool, but I am having to constantly fiddle around with art or take screenshots for marketing, and I use OBS to capture video and stick it online, to get wish lists basically.
Oh, nice, actually.
So I'm not sure there's any magic bullets there, just kind of standard stuff.
No, it's worth digging. Sometimes you do find treasure.
Yeah, I do have a question though. Like the indie landscape right now is very fruitful, but also people can say it's very saturated. And so if anything, the Epic Game Store has created somewhat of a ruffle, at least providing another avenue for developers out there. But there is this oncoming fear of the indie-ocalypse, where a lot of indie developers are having a hard time with so many choices for consumers now. What is your opinion on that, being on the front lines, doing this for over 10 years now?
I would definitely say the indie apocalypse is real. Some people say it isn't. And it's actually been going on for a long time. It's like a slow event, not really a sudden thing that's occurred. Just, there are so many more games on Steam, and it used to be a curated store, and now it's not really. So you are competing with a lot of other games. Now, a lot of them don't always get shelf space because they're just not even selling enough to register with the Valve algorithms. But they did change things last year and made it so that really the algorithm only shows pretty popular games. So a lot of indies found their games less visible, and their sales dropped a lot accordingly, and mine were unfortunately in that batch. So yeah, it's very difficult, and that is why I've been thinking more and more about why you shouldn't spend long making your game. Got to keep your costs down and so on. But there are other things, like you said, about the Epic Store. Unfortunately, the only people who are making money off that at the moment are devs who are already sort of multi-millionaires, who've got famous games, which then Epic come to them and say, do you want to put your next game on our store? I totally get why they're doing that, and great to the people who've done that. But that doesn't help me either, right? Because they haven't come to me. So but it does put pressure on Steam to hopefully lower their rev share, especially for indies or for a certain amount, like up to the first $100,000. We will see what happens there, and also Epic may open up to people like me later on, and I hope it does, and it's another avenue. And then there's still stuff like, okay, should I be porting my games not to mobile, because I think that's really, really difficult due to all the free-to-play games. I mean, it's way worse than Steam. Console, yes, on Switch, a lot of people are finding that to be profitable, more profitable than Steam. But PlayStation 4 and Xbox, One aren't really selling as many copies of games as on Switch, but may still be viable. And there may be new platforms coming along. We've got Google streaming things, Apple Arcade. Who knows what's sort of around the corner, PS5. So there's always an opportunity when new platforms come along, and I think it's worth trying to get in on those. But of course, it always helps if you're established and you've got a game to your name, if you see what I mean. So anyway, there are other ways to make money, by the way, which is some countries have grants or tax relief, and they have those in this country, the UK. They do in Canada, some other places. And you can try to get investment or publisher funding, stuff like that. But again, you need a track record to be able to do that, or one hell of a good idea.
Oh, sorry, we're back. I had to pull down the audio on the microphone so I could adjust my chair.
But I do have a question.
Oh.
When it comes to, it's very popular, obviously, and maybe cost effective to create your own engine, right? With the onslaught of new engines like Unity and Unreal, making it more and more easier for the indie developer. What is your opinion on developers out there looking to make their own engine versus using something like Unity right off the bat?
Okay, sure. So, I did make my own engine, but it was in a language called BlitzMax, which no one's really ever heard of, but it handled some low-level stuff like drawing and sound and so on. But I wrote a whole game engine on top with sprites and particles and menus and everything you need for a game, really. And that taught me absolutely loads about all aspects of making a game, really. So I think making your own engine is super valuable, but it's also quite difficult for a lot of people. Like they would have to use C++ or something like that. And so there's a certain sort of skill gate to do that. And you can also get stuck in the weeds. Like many people spend years and years making an engine and never actually ship anything. What I did is I spent 3 months building the engine, then shipped my first game. And then every game I enhanced the engine a bit more and kept making games. So that was a case of the engine was properly used. It wasn't just a sort of project which I could spend years on. But of course, these days, we've got Unity, Unreal, Game Maker. I mean, there's so many things, which is great for people who want to make games. But it also means that more people are making games. So you've got that sort of thing. And the other thing that I think is a bit dangerous is Unity makes it very easy to make 3D games. And so the problem is all kind of 3D games need more complex assets and animation and so on, and it takes longer to program 3D games, and quite a lot of indies I know have fallen into the trap of making 3D games, and their project length has expanded, and of course that means ultimately if it doesn't sell more, then less dollars per hour at the end. So that's why I've personally stuck to 2D. I know some people disagree with that because they're very fast at 3D and they've got the right sort of tools and pipeline and are skilled at it. Okay, great, but it can be a problematic area for some people. So that's kind of my feeling on engines.
So on the topic of sustainability, for the audience sake, asking on their behalf, what would you say would be your most common problem that you encounter all the time in every project? It's something that you like for example, I think marketing could be something that I would say is my most common problem that we encounter with whatever we do, like trying to find a way to make noise and get reception. What would you say is the most common problem that you find that you have to encounter as an indie developer with a long track record?
Well, definitely marketing is difficult, and we are gaining experience in that, and you can obviously spend money to get people to help with that as well if you have the money. So that's a big problem, but that's a whole big area. But in fact, I think the biggest problem is overscoping your game. Okay, so that's like you've got all these ideas. You want to make the game be like this. You start work on it and you discover that everything takes at least twice as long as you thought, and all these cool ideas you've got, you need to start axing them or slimming them down. And like, for example, I made this card game recently, and I'm working on another one now called Ancient Enemy, and every card in the game requires graphics, text, sound effects, some kind of code and rules. If I localize it, it needs localization, it needs testing, it needs balancing, and that's just for a single card, right? And each of those things can take hours and hours each. So when you've got many of those in a game, just add another 10 items here, 10 items there, you're adding weeks and weeks of development time. So overscoping is the real issue for many indies, including myself. One way I help with that is I make a big list of all the tasks that I need to do, and I constantly review it and reevaluate whether those things are still important in the game. And also, if I come up with new ideas midway through, which is often the case, I put them on a separate list called a polish list, and then I kind of ignore them, really. And unless they're amazing and need to be done right now because they obviously make everything better, they stay on this list. And then when I ship the game, you can then listen to what players say and find out they only really want 5% of your polish list, and you can implement those and ship them in an update. Whereas if you put the other 95% in, you've spent months and months more on the project. So yeah, overscoping is the main issue, and it's something that everybody needs to learn to do better, including myself, and I'm on my 12th game.
You got me there, because I thought marketing was mine, but I agree. Feature creep, overscope, getting to 80%, then discovering that I need an additional 40% just because I think I need it. Like, oh man, this other game did this. Well, we got to add that. We're competing with them. Like, I see that overscope, that feature creep also being prevalent across a lot of the student projects that we've seen, across a lot of the other fellow indie devs when they're working on stuff. Bloat attacks us all.
It does.
So I'm going to switch to here 1 second. All right, so my next question for you is looking at the landscape of where players can or where developers can place their games, right? We talk about Steam. We talk about, you said the Epic Game Store now has entered the fray. You have places like itch.io and like all these different outlets where games can be released. But I do kind of want to focus on Steam for a moment because Steam kind of pioneered through as a PC juggernaut, replacing like pretty much all of PC sales brick and mortar style. Everyone goes to Steam if they're getting PC games, more or less. Like, I'm speaking very generally here. But now I'm starting to see, because of how much trash and garbage exists on Steam and trying to compete and find a window on Steam, like, it almost feels like if you're a small person or you're making an indie game, why, like, what's the benefit of even going to Steam unless they're going to give you feature space? Like, if you can't lock in like 20 minutes or 2 days on the front screen, like, hey, this game is on Steam now. If you don't get that, it almost feels like it's useless to go to Steam. And they still take such a heavy cut, even if they don't promote your game.
Yeah, well, I think you're right about that. Basically, the difficulty is that there isn't anywhere else to go, right? So if you're making games on PC, you can't go on GOG or Humble unless they invite you, or you can send them your game, but they may turn it down because they are curated stores, so they are turning away trash, but also maybe quite good games. So you can't really do that. You can put your game on itch, but the problem there is your sales are going to be way too small. So if you don't put your game on Steam on PC, then you're not going to be able to make a profit and be a full-time business. So Steam is kind of like your only option at the moment, unless Epic changes things up. So you have to work within their system, and that's not very easy. And to be honest, I think only 1% of games are the type of games that make enough money that the devs get sort of super wealthy, and that's great. And maybe only 5% or 10% maximum make the money back that the dev can carry on. I think most games are not making enough money to sustain full-time development. But then again, there's a lot of hobbyists putting games on there too, and if you can do this as a hobby and get someone else to pay the bills for your house, or maybe you've got a job and it's your part-time, then that's fine, right? But full-time, I'm afraid you've got to work with Steam and just do your best to analyze the market, reduce your scope, try not to spend too much, get the marketing right, get the game out there. You've got to make the right game for the market. And part of the problem these days is, like, I'm an established dev and I've got a following on Twitter, Facebook, newsletter, all this sort of stuff. And if I wasn't and I had to start from scratch, I think it would be incredibly difficult to get a following and build up those wish lists and launch a game on Steam to make money. So absolutely, people shouldn't really jump in full time. I think that they should test the water to make some games as a hobby, try to build up a sort of cult following, get on Twitter and other places, Reddit and so on, and start building up awareness of themselves and their games, and keep going at that before making the leap to full-time indie. And you should only do that when you've got enough money saved up for twice the length that you think the project will take, because it's always going to take longer, right? So it's kind of like you've got to work with Steam, and I'm trying to work with them on my current game, and there's good people there trying to make the platform better and so on. It's just there's a lot of content on it, so it is hard to stand out. You're dead right.
All right. Follow-up question for me then is, now admitting that, like, Larry, no, you should go to Steam, right? Like, that it's a necessity regardless of the difficulties. It's an essential part of your business as an indie dev for PC. I want to create a scenario for you, and let's just see. This could be really fun, or it could be very difficult. So this might be a reality for a lot of people watching and listening right now. You finished your game, right? You have $1,000 as a marketing budget. So how would you market your next game if all you had was $1,000 to spend to market it? What would your strategy be?
$1,000, yeah, that isn't much. But it's more than zero. So there's a thing called Keymailer, and I think that's $150 to sign up to, and I would use that to make sure you send out keys to streamers, and I think they can also request them through there. So it's a kind of central repository to handle that. So Keymailer is $150, and then of all the different kinds of ads, Cliff Harris is very experienced with doing ads as an indie, and he and other people I've heard have said that Facebook ads generate the best sort of clicks through and give you the best control, really. So you would drive Facebook ads to your Steam page to get wish lists before you launch, and then you've got to still do all the sort of grassroots stuff like getting on Twitter and posting stuff on however you say that, Instagram, Reddit, wherever the hell you can. You've got to sort of keep putting the word out. Though that's not enough money to go to a show, of course, so you can't do that. So it would be ads and key mailer. If you had a bit more, you might be able to work with a marketing company and pay them a certain fee.
How much would you say is a bit more? Like 2,000?
It's pretty tricky.
3,000? Oh, did you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, say that again.
Okay, so I was saying, you said if you had a bit more, you could work with a marketing company. So just to paint that picture, how much would you say that bit more is? Like a $3,000 marketing budget? Maybe 5,000 or maybe 2,000?
Well, for example, there's a company called Evolve PR based in Vancouver, and they've got a particular package you can sign up to for sort of $1,500 or more. I mean, that's like an entry level. There are other marketing companies that may charge you less, but it's like, what are they doing for the money? If they're just sending out a bunch of emails, it's not really worth it. But they've got to have good contacts and be able to get your game in front of those contacts to stream, basically, or press.
Well, Jake, I definitely have a question. When it comes to putting your games out there and talking to all this press and like always opening yourself up to different avenues and looking at like Epic Game Store, even though you pointed out like these are for the big hitters, obviously their strategy over there is very clear. They want to make a lot of noise, so they're going to go with the big hitters that are already doing well. What has been the key strategy, despite of all the changes with Steam and everything? How do you separate yourself from that so that you, as a marketer, as a person that's branding your own game, is always going to be set up for success, no matter what everyone else is doing? What is the key way to kind of keep you in line to make yourself successful?
Well, I think it's to be adaptable and to adapt to the market. So, I used to make casual games and sell them on Big Fish and so on. And as those markets declined, I started looking at Steam. Too late, actually. I should have moved to Steam a lot earlier. But then figuring out how that works and building up on that, and maybe if something else comes along, I will move to that. In fact, I've already got things in the pipeline that I don't want to talk about yet, but that aren't Steam related. So, you've got to be adaptable, and you've got to try new things out. And in order to do that, you need to either have a game that you can make fairly quickly, or do what I've done, which is I've got a game that I reuse the engine and then I modify the gameplay, I add new stuff in and put new assets in. So it's not the same development time as making something from scratch. So a lot of developers don't reuse stuff. They just want to make something brand new each time, and I get that, but you can do that in game jams if you want that sort of vibe. If you're running a business, you've also got to sort of reuse what you've already got and adapt it to the markets. And that's why my latest game, Ancient Enemy, is like my past game, Shadowhand, except it's got a more kind of, I would say, grim dark theme suitable for Steam, and we've altered the mechanics based on the way people are sort of have given us feedback from the first one and stuff like that. So it is be adaptable.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Being adaptable. I mean, it doesn't have to just stay within the indie landscape. Obviously, we're talking to a lot of mobile development. We're talking to a lot of to AAA developers. Being adaptable is the key thing, I feel, that makes anybody a survivor, because as soon as we get comfortable is when we start wavering off, we start losing our edge, we start being aware of what's going on around us. And I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of developers get caught off guard when the employers don't want to employ them anymore. So I think that type of mentality is true for pretty much anything, not just games, but any industry. I do have a question from the Twitch audience, and I just want to remind anybody that are wanting to ask questions to Jake, you can YouTube wherever you're watching. You can go ahead and ask them because we will be asking them live. So here it goes, Jake. All right.
Brandon Cam.
H.S. Kimpton asked, how many games did it take before you started to earn profit for your game development?
So it was my third game, which, well, actually, it did make some money, but it took many years to make that money. So do you know what? My fifth game is more accurate. 5 games. But I did make a lot of them very quickly, and that was 2 years after I started, and that was actually contract work. So I proved that I could make games, and I got hired to make a game, and I got paid contract work to do that with a revenue share on the end. So, and then after that, each one has made okay from either okay to pretty good money.
Nice. All right, so I've got one coming from, it looks like Silent Hero, and they're saying in Twitch, how feasible of a business model is it to sell the assets from your game while it's still in development to generate income during development?
I've never done that, and I probably wouldn't want to do it because I want my game to have unique assets, sound. Normally you can't sell sound anyway due to the license agreements with the musicians or audio people. The artwork, hopefully you own for your game, but you don't really want it on another game, in my opinion. That's also why I wouldn't buy an asset pack from the Unity store and use it on one of my games. It wouldn't be unique. It's okay for prototyping, but it's never going to have all the assets you want in the same style for your game. So I've never done it. I mean, maybe some people have, and great if that's worked for them, but I personally wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I've thought about doing something like that after my game is sold. So i.e. like you sell the game and then let's say your tails start to go back down to 2-3 copies a day or less. I would say, hey, here's the asset pack I used, or here's the sound pack or the animations. But that's after the initial sales spike. I would probably do something like that personally.
Yeah, it makes sense. And one thing I did do years ago was I sold my game engine for $50 a pop, and I sold 200 of those for $10,000. And then I sold a license of it to Big Fish Game for some more money. So
and was
engines are worth more probably than assets.
Was that the Blitz engine that you then wrote over that engine, or you did like another unique ground up engine?
Yes, it was that Blitz engine.
Gotcha. Next question I have comes to you from, it looks like Freddie Ia. I hope I pronounced that right on Twitch. Is it viable to release your game by yourself, like on your own site, versus going through a marketplace for games, the Discord store or the Unreal Epic Games store, Unity store, or what's the Steam?
Yeah, that funny portal called Steam. Yeah.
I almost forgot it. That's the sad part. I have released
games on my own site, all of them. All my games are released on my own site, but is it viable? Absolutely not. I mean, I made like $50 last month from games on my own site, right? So I've got a Patreon now and it's making more money than that. It used to be sort of viable, so a lot of indies who've been around as long as I have used to sell direct before Steam, and some of them did pretty good. Some of them even got to sort of 6 figures a month, but that revenue's been slowly dropping off. Why? Because everyone goes to Steam. They want their games on Steam in that library, and we've had mobile and other platforms and consoles, so people's money is spread out, and people aren't sort of as trusting to go to a dev site and get it from there, even if it's DRM free, because there are no achievements or whatever, other aspects. So it's not viable, but you can do it, and I always do it because I think I'm in indie, so that's what I do. I sell the games myself on my own website.
I mean, I do have a question regarding to that. Like, you were mentioning before how you were using your website, you were using different avenues, Patreon being a crowdfunding source, so you don't have to go all in with Kickstarter, all or nothing. I see a lot of developers, indie crowd, that are using Patreon as a way as like pay as I go type of way. It's kind of like fund me as I go, as I kind of build this like internal testing group to test my ideas, but at the same time have an actual steady revenue stream. Like, is that something that is starting to blossom in your opinion?
Well, Kickstarter, I saw some stats a while ago. Kickstarter sort of leveled off in terms of the amount of game dev projects on there. But yeah, some people do that very successfully. We're trying the Patreon, but most people I know don't get more than several $100s a month, so that's not really enough to live off. It's useful and nice. The only ones that make thousands are sort of like, you know, pornographic content, basically. So, and I'm not making that at the moment. You know, who knows? You know, it's definitely, you've got to look at all kind of avenues to make money. And I've got my eggs in many different baskets. I've got 10 games out there making money on casual games, portals, and lots of them on Steam. I'm publishing someone else's game. We've got the Patreon. I sell direct. I used to make money from ads on my website, but I've got rid of most of them now. So it's kind of like whatever you can do that's not too time consuming, but you have to evaluate everything and see, is it going to generate a decent return? Like some sites generate virtually no money at all and others generate a lot more, and so you can't be wasting your time too much. You want to ask around and find out, is it worth your time?
All right. So I think you've offered a lot of key information here, and I've even tried to like throw some curveballs your way. So I'm going to ask you now for just like a general, like, hey, if you're really going to do this indie thing, you know, make sure you get your money in order, like you said. Make sure your games are across portals. Make sure you have, you know, an expectancy of like your wish list to actual sales ratio. But here's my key question. You did this for a reason. Like, you love video games. You love making indie games. You left one career to make this jump, and now you're doing it full time. When things don't go well, when things look dark, when things look like, man, I might not be able to push on, right? I'm not asking for any sort of like practical advice here. Just maybe it's like some sort of emotional pick me up. To all the people who are in the, I might need to give this up, or I don't think I have it in me. Like, what well wishing do you think you would offer to somebody, or even to yourself, who was in a time where like, man, they were at the valley and not the peak? You know what I mean? Because there's definitely a lot of stress and emotional strain in being completely dependent for all of your revenue, not having a steady paycheck, not having set expected work that you need to complete. And because a variety of things lead to you being successful in indie. And so it's a lot for somebody's mind to have to deal with all the time. So I guess what, you know, pat on the back support could you offer our audience who might be in that position?
Okay, well, let's have a think about that. So you're dead right in that when you run a business, you don't have certain money coming in. You know, you don't have, I think it's worse for you poor Americans who have to pay, you know, all this health insurance stuff as well. That's another big worry that I don't have to worry about in my, you know, socialist UK country, right? So that's good. But you know, it's not just the games. Like, all games have a sort of life cycle where you're excited about them and this is great, and then there's this dip and you feel, oh my god, I'm never going to finish this thing, and then eventually you push out the other end. And that can be combined with life events, like maybe you get ill, or you injure yourself, or your partner has a problem, or you have a bereavement in the family. So there's any number of different things which can you know, cause you some kind of downers. But ultimately, I remember that, you know, I love making games, and I've got into this because it's my hobby that I love, and I've been doing it my whole life. And sometimes you have to accept that, okay, you're having a down patch or down time, and then you need to sort of basically get outside, get some nature, you know, parks and walks and that kind of stuff. And also I do things like play other video games that get me inspired again, and then I want to get back to making my own game. I also do stuff like listening to chip tunes and trance music and stuff that uplifts my spirit, right? You know, but it's okay to have off days, but you always try to stay in a routine. That's one of the things I do, is I have a routine. I get up, I know what I'm doing, I start, and I keep this list of tasks like I've said before, but I have a load of easy tasks at the top of it. So when I'm feeling low energy, I can just tackle an easy task and feel good about doing something, anything, even a 5-minute task. And that normally motivates me to carry on. And I try not to worry about the work as a whole ahead of me, the mountain. I sort of take each small step at a time and try to visualize a positive outcome of me shipping the game and me being very happy with it. So it's a whole bunch of things, but that is as hard as making games yourself, staying motivated. It's something that I work on every day, and I don't always succeed, but I keep working on it.
Yeah, one of the major things I've seen is that the runway, being able to build that for yourself, having the confidence to keep on that path through the ups and downs. With that being said, Larry and I
I can't hear you at the moment, guys, because I'm getting a lot of buffering.
Oh, no worries.
Maybe wrap it up a little.
As you are getting us, I was talking about the runway, how indie development is all about staying on that path and being sustainable, right? And working the issues out. And it's not about hitting home runs, but it's a marathon, right? So with that being said, Larry and I have both finally are working for ourselves, and we are on that runway. And there are times that we look at that as like, that's a really far path. So how do you keep yourself motivated? Is it all about financially, keeping yourself stable enough to kind of save up for those rainy days, or is it something more mentally comprehensive than that?
Yeah, what's your big carrot?
I think he's getting our feet slowly.
Okay, I kind of missed some of that, guys, because of some buffering, but I think you were saying, how do you save up for rainy days and keep your stuff going? Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. Basically, yes. How do you get through all the rough patches, even though you feel like you're at the end in most days?
Okay, cool. So when I first started, I did some other work on the side, like I did some IT consultancy. So I went out and got rid of viruses off people's computers and installed networks in businesses. My partner, my wife, she was earning some money, which helped out as well. And also we just lived very frugally at first. We didn't spend much money. I even borrowed money to make it through tough patches. And then I topped up my income with contract work and stuff to survive. So I just did whatever I could do, basically, to survive until sort of finances got better. And even still, I have ups and downs. I get some money in the bank, and you've got to be careful not to blow it all. Like, don't get a big studio and spend all your money on that. Only spend a proportion of your income on the next project, so you've got something in the bank. You've always got to have a runway, and that's why working with other people who can perhaps help fund you, or you can get a grant, is very useful as well. You've just got to do whatever you can do if you believe in it enough and want to have success. And that sounds like you guys are on that path, and I wish you the very best of luck with it.
Thank you. And you're helping us on that path by being one of our featured guests in the Game Dev Unchained Expo. First one. So we want to thank you very much for your time and your consideration for being here to help us. Even though, a lot of people know what you do and a lot of people are here to see you, we still appreciate that, every now and then you're like, those Game Dev Unchained guys, they're all right. I'll do a podcast. I'll do a speech. So good on you, man. We appreciate your support with this. We really do.
And the platform is yours. We are at the end. Anything that you want to promote? Of course, we do have your Twitter handle.
No worries.
And anything else you want to promote, go for it.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Well, I just want to thank you two actually for putting this conference on, because having a free online conference for people packed full of epic speakers is brilliant. So massive thanks to you two for organizing this, and for all the other speakers, and for everyone watching. I've got to go and teach Aikido now. That's something I do, by the way, that keeps my brain working in different ways when I'm not at the computer.
Nice.
But I've got a game called Ancient Enemy, which is on Steam. I'm actually collecting wish lists for that game at the moment, and it's due out later this summer. I'm going to post a link into the Twitch stream, and perhaps if you could all take a look and click that and share that round, I'd really appreciate it. But just thanks again, and all the best.
Always, man. Thanks again to you as well, and good luck in class.